These are notes 11.1, Progressives Drive Reform. This is the first part of the notes for topic 11, our new unit over America Comes of Age. Here's some key terms: muckrakers, social gospel, settlement house, direct primary, initiative, 17th Amendment. Most of the topics we talk about in this entire unit will continually come back to progressivism and the overall impact of it, especially when we focus a lot on Teddy Roosevelt as a president, and Taft. Some of the other presidents at this time period were all progressive presidents or had those leanings. Progressivism was basically a reform movement. It was a response to urbanization and industrialization. It was, we've kind of touched on this before, the ideas of progressivism, but not as a whole movement. Some of our topics that we covered when we talked about cities and urbanization, we talked a little bit about changes, especially the concerns of urbanization. But this really goes into an entire political movement and social movement that banded together at this time. Their major goals were to end political corruption. They wanted to harness big business. They were against monopolies and trusts that controlled large companies, multiple companies that controlled entire industries like oil. And they focused on things like child labor, working conditions, how the overall danger of some of the working conditions in factories. And we'll talk about a couple examples primarily in this time period. There's some other groups that are going to come about in this era. The Salvation Army played a big role in that. As you can see in this picture here, the whole idea of social reform is a big part of that. Now, if we compare the two, we've just talked about populism, a week or two ago. But when we look at progressives and populists, you can see that a lot of them kind of had some of the same ideas. Both of them were against big business. Both of them wanted reform. They were hostile to banks, railroads, trusts. Definitely were very concerned about the small business guy. Now, when we talk about progressivism, some of the biggest impacts at this time period were actually writers and journalists. Journalists wrote for not only newspapers but also books, and did pictures and paintings, depending on what time period we're talking about. But a lot of it went back to kind of like the sensational stories. The sensational stories were sometimes fictitious on purpose. I mean, people knew they were fictitious, but they were these stories that were based on a true story to gain awareness of the people of what life was really like in some of these urban areas, and some of these areas where people have never been to and probably would never go, but it told the story of these people, especially in cities and factories. They were called muckrakers. A muckrake is something that you would clean out a barn with, manure. It's basically like a rake, kind of like what you would call a soil rake today, but they called it a muck rake. Also, the term muck, to muck out a barn, basically to clean manure up from animals. Now, this term was actually coined by Teddy Roosevelt, and even though he was a progressive president, he gave that term to Upton Sinclair, and then it kind of stuck, and the muckrakers themselves kind of wore it as like this badge of honor that they were actually accomplishing something. We have some publications: The Shame of Cities, How the Other Half Lives, Jacob Riss, that's some of his work there. And Upton Sinclair wrote The Jungle, And there's also a assignment if you're more interested in that that you can choose to do in the layered, where he really goes into not only factory work and how dangerous it is, but meat packing. He goes through how basically people died and just got kind of ground up right in with the rest of the hamburger. Um, Not only that, he wrote a lot of stories on poverty overall. Now, during this time period, we also had religious organizations kind of come up with this idea of a social gospel, basically applying Christian principles to the overall society to make it a better place, to make the world as best as possible, um, as much as they could, and basically kind of like the responsibility of the Christian, like same idea as the Salvation Army, that they have the responsibility to take care of poor people. During this time, we also had the development of settlement houses. We'd probably compare this to like a mission today. Um, they were not only houses that helped immigrants, but they also would help um, poor people. They would provide social services, legal advice, food, clothes, kind of what you'd see not only with like a standalone mission, but now like with the community actions. Um, I think they're called CAP offices, community action programs. That's kind of what we see today, but it's a place where food banks take place, giving away of coats in the wintertime, things like that. That's what this settlement house would compare to. The lady that kind of started that was Jane Addams. She developed a lot of not only the settlement houses in the beginning, but also perpetuate them to start in other cities around the United States. We have the development of the YMCA at this time. The YMCA was actually established in the, I think it was 1840s, 1850s, but we don't have like the expansion of the YMCA until this time period. But not only was the YMCA a place for exercise, like we kind of see it as today, but it also was a community place. It worked to provide child care or um, religious programs in the beginning to basically help society. And it was established as a Christian organization at that point.